Hello everyone. Today we're going to investigate the evolution theory. Is it true or fiction? What does it say? And what versions of it exist? Let's try to examine this. The questions to discuss. Was there any evolution of man? Mankind is formed of one or several species. How did the ancestor of man actually look like? Why is this important to know? If you're not especially interested in the origin of life, but you open this video accidentally, you can spend a few minutes viewing it, drawing plenty benefits from doing so. You will learn something about the mechanisms and qualities of life and nature. You will learn why are people around the world so different among themselves. You will also learn how to apply this knowledge in your daily life. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Exactly this question, in one form or another, pondered the minds of many, who at least once thought on the character of life in general. Every few years, one or many scientists come out with theory speeches that they discover something which supposedly controls another thing, and which in its turn unequivocally proves that the chicken was first or that the egg was, never reaching a consensus. For the moment, let us leave aside this primal and most important task on the origin of life to those who are interested in it, and we in the meantime will move towards a simpler target, namely, what is evolution of life? There exist lots of theories on the origin and development of life, many of which are based on some observations of reality, or on the logical chains drawn from such observations, what commonly constitutes a stepping stone for the proposal of such theories. Shortly, it can be said that most people today heard at least once that supposedly species have evolved by adapting to the environment and other conditions, and that this theory was proposed by a wise old guy named Darwin, and that this is the most proved fact by the most scientific method that there exists. Firstly, it should be noted that Darwin himself never said such things. He only said that this would be theoretically possible if some conditions of his hypothesis would be met. But the Darwinian theory of evolution was created and developed by his followers. Secondly, it was never completely proved to be true, not with scientific or unscientific facts. Yes, some specific and individual points which this theory makes are really consistent, such as the environment's influence on the development of a living organism. Nevertheless, when one starts to put together the picture provided by Darwinists or by any other theories and their followers, and compare this picture with the observed reality, to put it mildly, questions begin to arise. According to modern synthetic evolution theory, the evolution itself is the totality of changes which occur in an organism by random mutations and the fixation of such acquired traits, which permits the rise of new species. But is this so? Let's find out. The modern theory says some 90 million years ago lived an animal from which sprang, by the way of random or almost random mutations, bats, camels, mammoths, manatees, and humans, the very humans. Supposedly all these animals sprang from this mysterious ancestor who lived 90 million years ago, and the humans, by the say of the same theory, diverged from primates some 30 million years ago. Got the idea? Let's move forward. What is with this strange photo of an insect, and how is it connected to mammoths and people? One American paleontologist had found in a piece in amber a bee, which was morphologically almost identical to a modern bee. But the thing is, this bee was 97 million years old. So, these organisms have not changed consistently for the last hundreds of million years. In the meantime, all this in just 60 million years have transformed into mammoths, rats, camels, and humans. Oh, no way, this is an insect, it's a distinct ecological niche, the adepts of natural selection might say. They have distinct mutational algorithms, you can't compare one to another, geneticists may affirm. We can argue plentiful with both sides, but this somehow reminds of another famous story or theory. And it sounds like this. There lived some apes in Africa, some of who turned into humans, while the others to this day climb the trees. The first, magically and randomly mutated, lost the fur, tripled their brain volume, morphologically restructured their skeleton metabolism, and changed their gene structure and quality with the speed of a bullet. while the others go climbing trees and roam the jungle, boringly looking at all this. Even if we do accept that some of them were predisposed to random mutations, a difference between the two should not have turned to be so great. If they diverged recently from a common ancestor in similar conditions, their mutational possibilities should not be so distinct. Something is definitely wrong here. This is how a common argument on a random subject in the scientific community looks like. First, someone observes something and says, "This is A." Others, who see that this A clearly does not apply to all observable examples, say this isn't A, it is B, and both sides go arguing whether it is A or B. A logical ending of such would be that some third party may enter the discussion and propose a synthesis of both sides, in such a way that this would not exclude but complete each other. Sounds beautiful, isn't it? Let's take a closer look at this phenomenon. It would seem at first glance proceed with the joint and let it be solved, but the thing is, even by doing so, the new result would again call for an antithesis, for such joint has already occurred, and to this day, a clear picture of how nature works does not exist. The new, so-called synthetic evolution theory is the same synthesis of distinct theories, including Darwinism, nomogenesis, and genetic mutation hypothesis. As this theory postulates, there is needed that the chaos of random or almost random mutations would transform the organism in such way and rate that it would not kill it by destabilizing it, and in the same time it should also change drastically its functioning into new forms. Not all at once, eventually in the course of a number of generations, but still it seems highly unlikely. Why? Try to imagine that a reckless tornado has gone through a dump, and as a result of its uncontrollable actions, pieces of electric and mechanic appliances transform themselves into a fully functioning shuttle, ready to launch. Of course, this is sort of a slightly embellished analogy, but this is what the main mutation ideas of synthetic evolution practically say. Even so, the achievements of this theory shouldn't be left underestimated. Even if the theory did not fulfill its primal goal, it does explain many things. It undoubtedly did bring us closer to attaining a clear picture of reality, but we are still far from a fairly complete one. The new theory of evolution, or how is it called, the neo-Darwinism, is focused on the investigation of basic, physical dense, material phenomena. This approach is good as long as it will not encounter in its way things that go out of its range. This shortly is what represents the main obstacle between modern science and its considerable potential of progress. The faith in that only what can be seen through a microscope can be touched or is approved to existence by scientific authorities can exist. Even so, as a famous dude once said, the process started, and the scientific community, little by little, is moving towards accepting of such probability that life exists on plenty levels at once, not only on the material, physically dense level. This will turn also in the joint of the evolutionary materialistic and creationist viewpoints. If some convinced materialists start to ironically laugh and say, "Oh no, the ether and astral are only good night tales," and so on, here is something they can think about, namely a question, which puts everything and everyone in their place. How is this possible that from a fertilized egg cell, which divides itself into exact copies, an organism is developed in which there are found cells of distinct structure, composition, and functions? If any is interested in a hint that leads to the answer to this question, one can grab and investigate a book called Blueprint for Immortality: Electric Patterns of Life by Professor Hara Sexton Burr of Yale University. This is not anyhow an illusion that there sits on a cloud a wise old man who is scrupulously watching over that from an egg should come out a chicken and not a mammoth. This would be far too primitive, although the creationists do have the quality that the materialists lack, namely, they allow the existence of life not only on the physical plane, and also recognize the existence of some intelligent and conscious entity or mechanism that time to time introduces correctives of distinct sorts in the natural state of things. But the creationists also aren't without fault. Most of them attribute everything to a certain God. He is the guy in control, we don't know all, and it's of no interest of us how everything works. Of course, they have the right to choose such position, as the first so the second. may ever decide for himself how and what it is. In the meantime, we shall dwell further in such a way that the question of origin and essence of the universe does not stand as the main objective in this video. We shall leave it aside for those who are interested in it. As for the moment, we're not really prepared for it, but in the perspective, we do possess an honest and fair chance. Let us go back to our evolution. According to the old Darwinian theory, we should observe a constant and slow growth of the brain volume, but as clearly as it is to be seen, the growth is not constant, but impulsive or spasmodic. But according to the synthetic theory, the rhythm of the growth stands within the limits. But this same theory does not explain why did some animals so drastically transform while others did not. And it also assumes that by the way some random mutations, some anthropoid apes like the Australopithecus transformed into early Archaeanthropes or the Erectus. But is this so? Firstly, it should be noted that morphologically the Australopithecus and its counterparts aren't very much different from the modern chimpanzees, and almost the only argument in favor of them being the ancestors of man is the fact that they were able to walk on two legs. Some mysterious and ambiguous statement. The orangutan, for example, also can walk on two legs, but they don't really hurry into labeling him as human and giving him citizenship. But as the Australopithecus is long gone and can't really prove whether he is human or not, they let him well be. Why not? After all, it looks great on paper. Here is a reconstruction of the so-called early hominids. This one is called Homo habilis, with an estimated age of 1.8 million years. He stood around 1 meter of height without clearly expressed superciliary arches or brow ridges, and with a brain volume of around 500 cubic centimeters. The second is an early Archaeanthrope, called Erectus, with clearly expressed brow ridges and with a brain volume twice as big. Its kind stood around 1.5 meters tall. As it can be seen in the graph, the early Archaeanthropes troglodytes rise everywhere and at the same time, in the same form and look without any specific intermediary links. Then a constant and slow growth proceeds, and troglodytes rise their brain capacity up to 1100 cubic centimeters in the frame of 1 million years, in the best traditions of the old Darwinistic theory. Is this it? Well, not at all. Besides the fact that their brain capacity grows, they acquire new neutral traits. The chin weakens and recedes more and more, the face turns longer and narrower, and the nose starts to transform into something totally new. Firstly, it protrudes in the concave straight form, and then, as the brain grows, it turns into a fully convex eagle nose. This is the very process of the rise of Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthalensis and others, which is to be seen as another impulse in growth somewhere between 1.5 million years ago. At the same time, some other representatives of the Archaeanthropes show totally opposite traits, a round face and a wide and shorter skull. Where is there any logic and consistency in all this? Until not so long ago, it was commonly thought by the synthetic theory also that the man evolved to its modern looks in Africa by means of divergent evolution just 65,000 years ago. But recent genetic and archaeological finds completely erased any trace of probability of such postulate. The humankind in its modern form not only did not rise 65,000 years ago in Africa from one population, but is itself a mix of several species. If these finds do reflect the reality, we should observe in the phenotypes of modern humans some people that would express to some degree the traits of the troglodyte race. Is it so? The first three photos are reconstructions of the Archaeanthropes troglodytes based on early skulls dating between 1.8 to 1.2 million years ago, with a brain capacity ranging from 700 to 900 cubic centimeters. In the lower left corner, we also see an Archaeanthrope troglodyte with an estimated age of 1.65 million years and 900 cubic centimeters. Next to him stands Heidelbergensis with an estimated age of 500,000 years. Then follows Neanderthalensis with 50,000 years of estimated age and around 1600 cubic centimeters. As you can see, morphological traits of the early Arcanthropes troglodytes are quite stable, and they astoundingly look alike, despite differences of 200–300,000 years and more, and their supposed heir, the Heidelbergensis, already owns a clearly convex nose and a bigger brain. The Neanderthal is the champion between all of them as for brain volume, so for the nose size and its convexity, some strange kind of evolution. Along with brain size growth, the nose grows too, in quite a specific direction, having a peculiar form. Random mutations, they say. Excluding the photograph placed in the center, which is another reconstruction of an Arcanthrope troglodyte with an estimated age of 1 million or more, all of them are modern people. These left and right photographs, the oldest of which is around 100 years and the newest a couple of years, it is plainly obvious that the side photos of the upper row stand closer to troglodytes, while those in the lower row stand closer to modern man. You will now see in the lower center position a graphic reconstruction of an early Heidelbergensis with an estimated age of around 600,000 years. As it is seen, the Papua people together with him look like neighbors, not distant relatives separated by more than 500,000 years of fictive evolution. And they look so alike for the basic reason that they own similar quantities of genes of the same species that combined or interwove in a similar pattern. With this, inheritance is not annihilated. Just in this case, what we have is not some kind of random mutations evolution, but simply an almost gradual interbreeding of different species. It still sounds fantastic. Here are a couple of examples of the supposed Neanderthal kind. Observe all distinct forms that there are. Mainly the difference is seen in noses and various forms and sizes, also in skull morphology. Here is what a renowned Russian anthropologist says about this phenomenon. For all these findings, a combination of Neanderthal and sapien features is typical, often in a rather contradictory version. In addition, a pronounced asymmetry of the skull and face, as well as the presence of numerous intercalary ossicles in the joints of the vault, according to the studies of Benevalenskaya, are markers of hybrid origin. And here is the second, a more detailed graph. The rise of Neanderthals is marked by the sudden impulse in brain volume growth around 200,000 years ago. In the same time, they acquire new traits, such as a slimmer, more convex and longer nose, a receding chin and a reduction of the brow ridges. Meanwhile, others express a wide face and a round head. And then we see a long head and nose and also a narrower face. How is there such variation possible? On the left is a skull found in a cave in China. In the center is its reconstruction. The skull was found in ground layers that are approximately dated between 110 and 140,000 years. To the right we see a photocomposite of modern people of Eastern European type or of white-faced Cro-Magnon strain. Just based on this, the out of Africa theory can stand no more, even without any genetic tests. But some may affirm that this is the oldest skull which shows modern man Homo sapiens Cro-Magnon traits. Is it really so? Of course, the sample Cima de los Huesos 14 is a child who did not reach maturity, but even so a marked similarity is observed with the two samples to its right. Besides this, there is noted a peculiar variation between them, and even if this variation is quite small, is a sign of an expression of a trait belonging to another species. Impossible, you say? Only an interspecies variation? Which are the chances that this variation is truly a random and insignificant one, taking into account that it is expressed exclusively in the distinct rate of expression of the brow ridges or superciliary arches? As we already know based on data from genetic studies, that modern man is a hybrid of several species, and in this perspective it is clear why the third sample shows slightly protruding superciliary arches. But what about the first? Well, it should be noted that the first sample was found at a site where all the other fossils found belong mainly to the Heidelbergensis type of troglodyte. The second, or the one in the center, has the least expressed superciliary arches, which are almost absent, and it stands closest to the Homo sapiens of Cro-Magnon type. but still is also a hybrid. Who is interested in finding out the reason for such statement can easily find on the internet photographs showing this skull from different angles. Let's try to answer the initial proposed questions. Was there any evolution of man? If we call evolution the hybridization and distinct recombinations of genes from various species, then there was. Mankind consists of one of several species. Of several species, which in admixture form a great number of hybrid subspecies. How did the ancestor of man look like? It is known that it is not accustomed to answer with a question to a question, but nevertheless, the ancestor of which species? In the course of this study, by way of long mind games, the principles of which are hard to put in a few words, there have been found the characteristic traits of the initial types or species which took part in the creation of present-day mankind. It's no secret how did the erectus look like. The hairiness on the face is not included in the reconstructions, as to permit the observer of drawing a clear idea of the forms and lines of the head. Observation: some images can slightly deviate from the complete portrait of the initial type, so the images should be completed with elements of description. Troglodyte race. They stood around 1.5 meters tall, endomorphs. Brain volume around 700 to 900 cubic centimeters, a small, elongated skull with a protruding occipital bone, dark brown or black skin and eyes, protruding superciliary arches, heavy hairiness of the body, stiff dark hair, developed musculature very strong and fast, had heavy and resistant bones, long arms, short legs, barrel-like elongated trunk. Their genes are present in almost all modern populations, even if in small amounts. Here are a few reconstructions based on skulls of early archaeotypes. It is clearly noted they did look alike quite a lot. We were told that more or less pure representatives of this species are long gone, but is it so? Here are a few quotes from a story from many others brought together in a book "Борьба за троглодитов" of a renowned Soviet scientist Boris Fyodorovich Porshnev. Observation: Abnawayu is the name given by Abkhazian locals to the troglodyte people of the mountains. This is a story about how at the end of the 19th century some people have caught a wild woman, a representative of the troglodyte race, who was later called Zana. Beginning of quote. Abnawayu's skin was black or dark gray. All the body from the legs to head, and especially bone in the lower part, was covered in black reddish hairs. They were in places as long as the width of the palm, but not so thick. At feet level they were already rare. The palms were hairless. On face the hair was rare, of a shorter length, but on the head, in the form of a roundish hat, a chaotic accumulation of black, very thick and shiny stiff hair, which as a mane went down the shoulders. As all of Nawayu, Zana could not speak. For all the decades she lived in the country among people, she did not learn to say at least one word. Abnawayu was tall, massive and wide. She had very big breasts and owned a massive ass. Quite muscular arms and legs, but the shin from the knee to ankle was of a very strange form, without any thickness in the middle. The fingers on the palm were thicker and longer than most people's. The forefingers had the ability to widely expand, especially the biggest one, which also happened when she was angry. Her face was amazing. It inspired fear. Wide, with pronounced cheekbones. A flat nose with flaring upwards nostrils. The lower part of the face was pushed forward as a snout. A wide mouth with enormous teeth. Unusually looking protruding occiput. On the lower forehead the hairline started almost exactly after the brow line, which was covered by thick hairs. The eyes had a reddish tinge, but most scary of all, the expression of this face was not human, it was animal-like. Sometimes, rarely, Zana would unexpectedly start laughing, showing her big white teeth. Nobody ever noticed her smiling or crying. After living lots of years, first at Achba's house, then at Genaba's, Zana amazingly until old age and death did not significantly change. She didn't have grey hair, her teeth did not fall, and she conserved her full strength. And she was indeed strong and fast. She was able to run faster than a horse. She could swim across a boisterous river named Mokvi when it spilled out, and took baths in a cold water spring which bears her name to this day. Whether it was summer or winter, it did not matter to her. She easily lifted with one hand and would carry on her head, uphill from the mill, a 5-pud sack, which is about 80 kilos of weight. Clumsy like a bear, she would freely climb trees looking for fruits, and her massive jaws easily crunched walnuts. Lots of times the Neanderthal woman got pregnant from different men and gave birth, without any sort of help. Then she'd take and clean the newborn in water, which was normally quite cold. Lots of the hybrids did not survive such ice-cold procedures. Later, people started to take away the newborns from Zana and feed them. And so 4 times miracles happened. 2 sons and 2 daughters of Zana grew into fully adult people with speech and intellect, but who had some physical or psychical peculiarities. Even so, they were well able to walk and lead a social life. End of quote. Here is a photograph of one of Zana's boys, named Kvit. He looks astonishingly similar to Arcanthropes, troglodytes, and even more alike to the Papua people. The black race, Negrito pygmies. Very short of stature, standing from a meter to a meter 20 of height. Ectomorphs. Brain volume around 1200 cubic centimeters, among whom is common a rounded form of the forehead in the shape of a dome, black skin and dark, slightly bulging eyes. Body hairness is overall absent, the head is short kinky. Weak to moderate musculature, the length of the arms and legs also is moderate. Their genes are present among all African populations and Oceania, and little to very little amount are also present among populations of Middle Asia, Central America and Europe. The spherical, bulb-like shape of the forehead is a result of development of the central sections of frontal brain lobes that are located behind the forehead, and the absence of significant development of side sections of the frontal lobe. This particular shape of skull happens because the development of the brain dictates the shape of the skull, and not the other way around. This 19th century hypothesis on brain development is now an established fact confirmed by multiple independent scientific studies, the oldest of which are more than half a century old. Anatomical characteristics: short stature, round face, and slightly bulging eyes with arc-shaped brows. But besides this, there exists some population of Central and Western Africa which show distinction from this portrait. Namely, they usually stand around 1.8 to 2 meters tall, have long legs with thin or athletic body complexion. Between many different forms of skull and face, some of which to one degree or another reproduce traits of the black race, in combinations with signs of the yellow or red race, among Nilotic and West African populations, some phenotypes are found which were described earlier as the athletic and tall black types, which do not fit under the characteristic of any hybrid types of the black race with the troglodyte, red or yellow races. Who are they then? As it can be seen on the broad photographs, they somehow remind of facial anthropometry of some Euripids or white people. And taking into account the fact that the Upper Nile together with the West African coast has been a popular place for resource hunters, namely colonists, for the last few hundreds of years, the assumption that the tall and athletic black phenotypes are the heirs of the interbreeding between the colonists and the local black people certainly fits well into the picture and explains many things. Of course, there is left the possibility that these phenotypes to be a result of convergent evolution, given to which these phenotypes are not a hybrid phenomenon but an evolutionary one, which was developed gradually among some black populations, which turned out to evolve such traits in many millions of years, living in similar conditions as the white race. Even if such probability exists, it has a very low percentage of turning real. In such case, the first option seems more plausible. The yellow race, below average height, around 1.5 meters, ectomorphs, brain volume around 1300 cubic centimeters, express zygomatic bones, concave nose, skin of yellow tone and dark slanting eyes, double epicanthic fold, no body hair, black and straight hair. Elongated trunk, feet fingers have superior mobility. Their genes are present in populations of Eastern Asia, Oceania and both Americas, in small and very small amounts in Africa and Europe. Here we have a few examples of more or less pure representatives of the yellow race. The white race, race of giants, tall and very tall, from 2 to 3 meters of height, mesomorphs. Brain volume from 2200 cubic centimeters and more, square head, white face and big forehead. The nose is small, very thin, strong jaws and chin, white skin, straight light hair and bright blue eyes. Body hair is generally absent except for a long, straight and thick beard in men. Their genes are met within almost all populations of Earth, especially in Europe and Asia. In Asian populations, the amount of their genes is quite small. A considerable amount of white race gene influx is observed between Upper Paleolithic and Neolithic. Among many populations which show great height, there is observed a regular pattern of presence of traits which are inherently characteristic to the white race. This is easily seen in the examples within the Nilotic and West African phenotypes, as in many others. For example, if one observes photographs of tribal representatives of Aboriginal Patagonians from the so-called Tierra del Fuego, Southern America, one can easily spot that among them there are noticed traits primarily observed among the white race. There exists such a variation of the white race which has a narrow face, the phenotypes of which are commonly brought under the cumulative term, namely Nordics or Nordic types. What about them and how do they fit in? Let us continue and we will get to them eventually. Depending on your geographical location and local culture, the characteristics and looks of the next race for some may turn out to be a big surprise, while for others a common thing, because of which, just in case you fall in the first group, better take a seat just to be safe. The red race. Average height around 1.6 meters, ectomorphs, brain volume around 1700 cubic centimeters and more, a very long, big and high head. Narrow face, the chin and jaws are weak, a long, thin and convex eagle nose, bronze skin and very big, light brown eyes. No body hair, brunettes, sometimes the hair may have a bronze or copper tinge. Their genes are present among all populations in medium and high amounts, mostly in both Americas, Europe, Africa and Middle Asia. Clearly, if these portraits turn out to be a big surprise for you, it may seem at first sight that these are someone's fantasies and not a depiction of reality, but in this case, it would turn out productive not to draw any sudden conclusions. The initial traits of the red race, even if to some they may appear out of this universe, are met and found all around the earth. Above, we have different statues from the Americas, and in the lower left corner, we see a reconstruction based on a skull supposedly from Southern America, and next to it we have statues from Egypt. In the lower right corner, we see a modern photograph of a woman who is a hybrid of the black and red race. Here are a few examples of the traits joined, which belong to the red race, but because in most cases the genes of this race are present in hybrid offspring, we observe almost all characteristic traits of the red race expressed in one individual very rarely. Because so, we were able to reconstruct the initial portrait of the red race by combining the traits observed in many people. The following slide will be one representing various skulls, so who is not a big fan of such sites is invited either to skip it or just not look at it. Surely these skulls belong to distinct time frames, with an estimated age ranging from ancient eras to early Middle Ages, and they're found almost in all parts of Earth. The upper row is represented by skulls from Europe. Next is the Arhaic skeleton. Middle row from left to right we have Korea, Texas and Omsk. Lower row in the left corner, two guys from Southern America, and then follows Lebanon and Turkey. What do scientists say about these skulls? Well, some say artificial deformations, others say innate traits. But as first as the second are right. It is true that there exist many skulls which have been subjected to artificial deformation, but such examples are easy to observe even from quite a distance. The thing is, they present, besides the obvious elongation, unnatural shapes and irregularities, such as either a sudden protruding or an evenly unexpected depression. which represent the result of applying wood, ceramic, and other utensils that by pressure give a deformation to the skull, making it grow in the desired direction. But the skulls you see right now express their naturally occurring shape. This can be easily seen in the harmonious joints of the skull bones, but this is not the only argument in favor of such statements. The skulls also show anatomical peculiarities which are not met among modern populations, such as distinct number of skull bone plates and their distinct way of joint, and some other characteristic traits. If this subject will gain interest, maybe I will make a detailed video with the consideration of all characteristic peculiarities of it, but such information already exists on internet, even on YouTube, so those who are interested can learn about it right now. The first, with a very long skull, we have a bright representative of its kind who comes from modern-day Bolivia, with an estimated age ranging between some hundred up to some thousands of years before prior. The second, in a bit dusty shape, we have a guy from Egypt, and the third is a Neanderthal from the La Ferracie cave, France. What brought these three guys together? In all cases, is a similar skull morphology. Observe the smooth gradient between the Egyptian and the Neanderthal. They look so alike that you wouldn't say they're separated by 50,000 years, but are at least distant cousins from the same village. The difference with the Bolivian is greater, but the latter isn't really that far from the next two. For a better example, let's observe a reconstruction based on a morphologically similar skull. As it is seen, between the first and the two next, there are differences, but those differences aren't that great. We can, of course, organize a few scientific debates and argue on one or another side of the question, but even so, it is fairly clear that the three of them belong to the same species, even if they show variations. Putting it in the scientific way, these three gentlemen show characteristic morphological traits which easily classify them as belonging to the same species. And only, well, this is not all. They are truly united by the blood of the red race, but they are different to a degree. For example, the Egyptian exhibits traits of the white race at the same time, and the Neanderthal himself is a hybrid of the red and troglodyte race. This explains the variation of traits they have expressed. What conclusions can be drawn from this? The erectus troglodytes didn't simply grow themselves half a kilo of brains in a time span of some thousands of years. The troglodytes became Heidelbergs, Neanderthals and others by interbreeding with other races. This greatly explains the difference among early and late Neanderthals, for example, and many more. Here we have a long skull and to the right a short one. What's so special about it? Well, the special thing comes when these two are combined. Of course, by laws and patterns of combinations, there are many results bearing distinct hybrid characteristics, but we shall dwell especially on one such result. The thing is, the joint of these two morphologies of the red and white race resulted in a quite interesting phenotypical combination, which I also took for being an individual kind of the white race, and didn't spot for quite a while that is just a hybrid combination among many others, such as what makes today all phenotypical variations including in the Nordic subrace of narrow and long-headed blondes. Of course, from this also results that the Mediterranean subrace is also hybrid of the two races, the difference between them being the distinct patterns of the expressed traits. The same with the Dinaric, Alpine or Melanesian and all other subraces. All of them are to a degree distinct and stable combinations of characteristic traits of a few races. How do we put this knowledge to our use in daily life? We should understand that we're all different and that this is great, but nevertheless our differences were all united by nature, so if we do not take care of it, we'll most likely perish. Investigate and correct all data and mechanisms of science in such a way that those would reflect reality, by which they rise in productiveness, helping people more effectively. This point is aimed especially towards scientific and pedagogic personnel. In medicine, we need to make a revision of those sections which can be affected by changes, taking into account that the metabolism for different races can be distinct, which was already proved to be true regarding different reactions to medicines and different rates of immunity to certain diseases. Here can also be noted the nutrition subject. Not all races used to eat the same food. Taking this in account, it would be possible to long-term prevent the rise of various diseases, especially those of autoimmune character. For psychology and psychiatry, this knowledge can also prove very useful. To this day exists a massive amount of scientific studies on different types of psyche among people. All is left is to organize and order this data in such a way that it would be brought to help people with more efficiency. In the pedagogical direction, we need to understand that because people are of distinct origins, they can also be different in their preferences or skills to practice or theory. Some are more efficient in art, others in physics or mathematics. Here will be useful to study history and to match anthropological portraits of many civilizations with their specializations. And he talks about that all this is racism only shows the degenerative character of the psyche of those who say so. Why? All is plainly simple. As some races are younger and others older, it is quite logical that they cannot be of the same level of development. An adult and wise human wouldn't ever say that just because a child just started to go to school is far more stupid than a young man who takes university classes. An adult and wise human understands there is need to give this child time and conditions to develop and learn, and he will surely prove himself. And this child can also be a great theorist, or he can become a popular master in some practical field, which is also very good, and not in the least worse than the first. Both are good, they're just diverse. And diversity is great, while all consider the unique special characteristic qualities. Now the idea that we should learn about the essence of our race and the culture of our ancestors may earn different perspectives. Taking into account that now you generally know what modern humanity is and what stands behind modern theories on the origin of man, it won't be so easy to convince you that your ancestors climbed trees just a few million years ago. What did they do then? Well, that is a question, a large-scale question. Firstly, which ancestors exactly? It is quite clear they weren't equally developed, and their civilizations were also different. They were so different that it won't be any big deal the possibility to state that they came to Earth from different planets, and that our own civilization is far from being the first one. The idea that we're alone in this universe and no one ever before existed or visited Earth before our fictive evolution happened, taking into account all that we know, is, to put it mildly, a highly improbable one. Still sounds crazy. Think about this. If we are fully to accept the official version of evolution theory, it so results that all plants growing today on this planet appeared and developed here from the very beginning. How then do we explain the fact that the plants are more sensitive and absorb more blue light when our sun emits yellow light of a different wavelength? Yes, these plants can and already are long adapted to absorb and use the yellow-orange light for photosynthesis, but they are more productive with the blue light, as it can be seen on the graphs below. Any who is dealing with agriculture or just with plants in general knows that they absorb more energy and are more effective in the second part of the day, when the sun shines from the southwest in the northern hemisphere and the light is of yellow-orange tones because of light diffraction in the atmosphere, and not when the sun is at midday, when the amount of light received by Earth is at its maximum, which would be far more logical for organisms that depend on light. Another inconsistency. This is similar to an automobile that was built to run on gasoline and then modified to run on diesel. And that automobile will go, but not as easy and natural as before. For the last, I want to share with you a beautiful painting by Ivan Shishkin. If you like this video, leave a feedback and share it with your friends.